Let me introduce you to Major William Martin of the Royal Marines.
Oh,
It's the spring of 1943. We're in London, and he is carrying a bit of a headache. You see, his bank manager has just written him this rather stiff letter about an overdraft of nearly 80 pounds.
which is not an insignificant amount of money back then.
Oh, not at all. And he's engaged to be married. Her name is Pam, and he keeps her photograph, along with, like, 2 of her love letters, tucked very carefully in his pocket.
Right, a man in love.
Exactly. There's a receipt in there, too, for an engagement ring, which was, well, if we're being completely honest, rather more than he could actually afford on a military salary.
Hence the overdraft letter from the bank.
Yeah, exactly. And if you were to empty his pockets right now, you'd find a couple of used theater tickets from a recent night out in London, a book of stamps, a silver cross, and a slightly cross note from his father about some family matters. He is, in short, a completely real man. He's got money worries, he's got a girl, he's got a whole life.
I mean, it is an incredibly vivid picture. You look at those items and you can practically reconstruct his entire personality. You know this man. You probably met him in a pub. He's the guy who buys a round he can't afford because he's just so in love.
Right, but here's the twist. Every single detail I just gave you is a complete fabrication.
An absolute lie.
A total, absolute lie. There is no Major Martin. There is no Pam. The love letters, well, they were written by total strangers. The overdraft, the ring, the theater tickets, that cross note from his father, all of it was forged. It was artificially aged and worn soft on purpose by 2 men in a basement in London who needed you, or rather needed the enemy, to believe in a person who was never even born.
Because the man whose pockets these are, well, he's dead.
Yeah. He was dead before any of this even began, and the whole wildly audacious point of this manufactured life is to chain it to his corpse, drop him into the freezing sea, and completely fool the German high command.
It is just wild.
It really is. So, okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to our deep dive. Today we are pulling from declassified MI5 files, Ewen Montagu's own post-war memoirs, and modern historical analyses to explore Operation Mincemeat. It is arguably the greatest, most audacious lie of the Second World War.
And our mission for this deep dive is to, strip away that glossy Hollywood-style polish that has coated this famous wartime caper for decades.
Yeah.
We aren't just looking at the cleverness of the trick.
Right. There's way more to it than just a cool spy story.
Exactly. We are examining the raw mechanics of the deception. We need to look at how they actually pulled off the forensics, how they manipulated psychology of the enemy, and really how they weaponized human nature. We are going to debunk the myths that have grown around it, and ultimately we want to reveal the heartbreaking truth about the very real, very forgotten man who served as the linchpin for this entire operation.
To really grasp the sheer audacity of this lie, you first have to understand the impossible strategic corner the Allies were painted into. Because you don't just wake up one morning and decide, hey, let's dress up a corpse with fake theater tickets.
No, you definitely don't.
You only do that unless you are completely out of conventional options. The desperation was palpable. So we have to look at the geopolitical map in the spring of 1943.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the situation was essentially a massive geographic trap. The Allies had just won the campaign in North Africa.
The Axis forces had been pushed out.
Yeah, so you have hundreds of thousands of Allied troops standing on the northern coast of Africa, looking across the Mediterranean Sea toward Axis-controlled Europe. The overarching goal is to breach Fortress Europe, as Hitler called it. But when you actually look at the map, there is really only one logical next step. It's the island of Sicily.
Because taking Sicily essentially kicks open the door to the Mediterranean, right? I mean, it secures the sea lane, so Allied shipping doesn't just get hammered by Axis planes.
Exactly. And it provides the perfect stepping stone to invade mainland Italy. It is the obvious move. Winston Churchill himself summed up the dilemma perfectly. He reportedly grumbled that, quote, a bloody fool would know it's Sicily.
A bloody fool would know it. That is a massive problem. Because if it's obvious to Churchill, it is glaringly obvious to the German high command.
Right.
The Germans are going to be heavily dug in. They are going to be fortifying the exact beaches that the Allied troops absolutely have to assault. They'll have artillery zeroed in on the landing zones, panzers waiting just behind the ridges. It's a bloodbath just waiting to happen.
And the mechanics of an amphibious assault dictate that you cannot hide an invasion force of that size. We are talking about thousands of ships, landing craft, massive troop concentrations amassing in North African ports.
You can't just throw a tarp over that.
No, you really can't. German reconnaissance aircraft are flying over every day, snapping photos. They can physically see the buildup. You can't hide the punch. So the goal for the Allies wasn't to hide the invasion itself. The goal was to make the enemy actively believe that the blow was going to land somewhere else entirely.
They needed to misdirect all that German anxiety.
Yes. The Allies needed the Germans to look at the buildup in North Africa and conclude that the target wasn't Sicily, but rather Greece in the eastern Mediterranean and Sardinia in the west.
Which brings us to this massive, overarching deception campaign called Operation Barclay. Operation Mincemeat wasn't just a standalone, wacky idea. It was one instrument playing inside a much larger symphony of lies.
Barclay was the broad campaign.
Right, they were building fake tanks out of wood and canvas in the eastern Mediterranean. They were generating fake radio traffic for phantom armies that didn't even exist, all to point toward the Balkans. But mincemeat was the sharpest, most targeted psychological weapon they deployed within that entire campaign.
Barclay was the static. The background noise designed to make the Germans nervous about Greece. Mincemeat was the smoking gun. It was the piece of hard evidence meant to validate all that background noise. But to understand how they even pitched an idea this morbid, literally using a dead body to deliver a fake smoking gun, you have to look at the British intelligence apparatus at the time. Specifically, the double-cross system.
Right, the XX committee. Yeah. Roman numerals for 20, which literally forms a double cross. I just love that detail.
Very clever.
But the double cross system wasn't just a clever name. It was a highly organized bureaucratic machine dedicated to turning German spies. The British had basically captured every single German agent in Britain and given them a choice: work for us or face the firing squad.
An easy choice for most of them?
Yeah, I would think so. So they were constantly feeding the Germans this diet of truth mixed with lies through these turned agents.
But the germ of the specific idea for mincemeat, it actually predates the height of the double-cross system. It goes back a few years earlier to a 1939 brainstorming document from the Director of Naval Intelligence's office. It was called the Trout Memo.
The Trout Memo?
Yeah. The memo was essentially a brainstorm of ways to deceive the enemy, and it compared the whole process to fly fishing. The underlying philosophy was that you don't just throw a bare hook into the water, you have to trick a trout into biting a fake fly by making it look like a natural, irresistible meal.
You have to make them want to bite.
Exactly. And buried in this long list of wildly creative ideas was Idea 28, which proposed planting misleading papers on a corpse and letting the enemy find it.
Now, whenever the Trout Memo comes up, a very famous name always gets attached to it. Ian Fleming, the man who goes on to create James Bond, the ultimate spy.
Right, his name always pops up here.
He was working in naval intelligence. He was closely associated with this memo. And over the years, this massive legend has grown that the creator of James Bond personally masterminded Operation Mincemeat. I mean, it's almost too perfect a story, right? The brilliant novelist dreaming up a real-world spy thriller.
And this raises a really important question about how history is remembered versus how it actually happened.
Yeah.
The historical record needs to be firmly and impartially corrected right here. Ian Fleming did not mastermind Operation Mincemeat.
Really?
No. He did not run this operation at all. He was a junior officer who served as an assistant to Admiral Godfrey, who was the director of naval intelligence. Fleming likely drafted the Trout Memo, meaning he physically typed it up and collected ideas from various sources, but Idea 28 itself was actually lifted from a detective novel by a guy named Basil Thompson.
So it wasn't even his original idea.
Exactly. The popular legend loves to credit Fleming because, well, it fits a really neat cinematic narrative. But the actual men who drove this operation, who built it from the ground up, championed it, and ran it day to day, were Ewen Montagu from Naval Intelligence and Charles Cholmondeley from MI5.
Montagu and Cholmondeley. Okay. I kind of think of this whole situation like playing a high-stakes game of poker, but your opponent can already see your cards reflected in your glasses.
That's a great way to put it.
You can't take the glasses off. You can't hide the troop buildup in North Africa. So your only option is to intentionally drop a fake cheat sheet on the floor, hoping your opponent's greed for stolen information overrides their suspicion. You have to convince them the reflection they are seeing in your glasses is a ruse and that the cheat sheet holds the real truth.
And Montagu and Cholmondeley had to build that cheat sheet. They took this bizarre, macabre idea from a memo and turned it into reality, which takes us out of the realm of abstract military strategy and into the deeply obsessive psychological craft of actually building a deception.
It really was a monumental task of applied psychology, but before you can build the man on paper, You have to physically procure the vessel.
Right, you need a body.
And the mechanics of this were incredibly grim, not to mention fraught with legal and ethical hurdles. They couldn't just use any casualty from a London morgue.
No, it had to be a corpse that could plausibly pass for a victim of a plane crash at sea. Specifically, someone who had seemingly died of exposure or drowning.
Because if a body washes ashore with, like, a bullet wound or obvious trauma from a car crash, the German medical examiners would instantly know it was a fake. You can't just requisition a body that fits those exact parameters from military stores. It's not like signing out a Jeep.
No, it's not. And the bureaucracy of death in London meant that everybody had paperwork, a family, an inquest. There was a paper trail for everyone. So they enlisted the quiet help of a London coroner named Bentley Purchas. He operated out of St. Pancras Mortuary. Purchas was a very pragmatic, arguably somewhat cynical man, and he essentially just kept an eye out for a recently deceased body that met their very specific criteria.
Just waiting for the right kind of tragedy to happen.
Basically, yes. And eventually, he found one. A body that was unclaimed, with circumstances that made it available for this kind of secret requisition without raising immediate alarms with any relatives.
Now, we're deliberately going to hold back the true identity of this corpse for now, because to really understand the mechanics of the operation, you first have to understand the character that Montagu and Cholmondeley layered over him.
They took this anonymous physical body and they started crafting Major Martin. And the level of extreme granular detail they went into is just mind-blowing. Let's start with the name. Captain, Acting Major, William Martin. Why that specific rank and that specific name?
I mean, I assume it wasn't just pulled out of a hat.
Not at all. It is a masterclass in intelligence psychology. The name William Martin is common enough that it would be incredibly difficult for German intelligence to verify quickly. There are many Martins in the Royal Marines. If the Germans checked the Navy list, they would find several.
It creates a haystack.
Exactly. But it's real enough to actually exist. If you pick a name that is completely unique, it's easily checked and debunked. If you pick John Smith, well, it just sounds like a lazy fake cover name. William Martin is right in that sweet spot of plausible anonymity.
And the rank, Acting Major.
As for the rank, they needed him to be senior enough to be entrusted with highly classified documents, but junior enough that he wouldn't be personally known to top German intelligence officers. A general would be recognized, a private wouldn't carry secret invasion plans, an acting major is perfect.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. The name is just a label. The actual illusion is created by the pocket litter. Montagu and Cholmondeley basically locked themselves in a basement and asked, what does a man carry in his pockets that proves he is a real, living, breathing human being?
The pocket litter is the proof of life.
Yes. What's fascinating here is the sheer empathy and narrative design required to build a lie this robust. They couldn't just give him a military ID. They decided he needed a personal life, a romantic life. They gave him a fiancé. They created Pam.
And they didn't just write down the name Pam on a piece of paper. They got a photograph of an actual intelligence clerk at MI5 named Jean Leslie to serve as Pam. Jean Leslie was photographed wearing a swimsuit on the banks of the Thames, giving it this incredibly authentic, personal feel. It wasn't a stiff studio portrait.
It looked like something a guy would actually carry in his wallet.
Exactly. Then they had strangers within the intelligence community write passionate love letters from Pam to keep in his pocket.
And they didn't just write them once and call it a day. They debated the tone endlessly. Should she be overly sappy? Should she be practical? They even included a receipt for a diamond engagement ring from a real London jeweler, S.J. Phillips.
The inclusion of the ring receipt is a brilliant touch. It grounds the romance in financial reality. But the absolute masterpiece of the pocket litter is undoubtedly the overdraft letter. They put a testy letter from his bank, specifically Lloyd's Bank, in his pocket. The letter complains that he has overdrawn his account by £79, which was a considerable sum.
Now, why would you include a bank overdraft on a secret courier? I mean, I would think you'd want your courier to look responsible. Like a Boy Scout. Perfect, disciplined, totally trustworthy.
That is exactly what a less sophisticated intelligence officer would do. They would make him perfect. But Montagu understood that perfection is highly suspicious. If you hand an enemy analyst a pristine, perfect soldier with a flawless record and perfectly ordered pockets, their internal alarms just go off.
Because nobody is actually like that.
Right. Human beings are flawed. We are mussy. We are a little careless. We spend too much on an engagement ring for a girl we just met, and we bounce a check. Creating a flawed, slightly irresponsible human being makes the character infinitely more believable. It bypasses the enemy's critical defenses because they feel like they are peeking into the messy, private life of a real person.
And the physical mechanics of doing this are wild. They couldn't just print these things out on fresh paper and shove them in his pocket. A crisp new theater ticket looks fake. So Cholmondeley literally carried Major Martin's belongings in his own pockets for weeks.
He rubbed the theater tickets against his trousers to get the right amount of sweat and friction on the paper.
He wore down the edges of Pam's photograph so it looked like a man had been taking it out of his wallet every night to gaze at it.
They even had to get him a replacement military ID card, because the first one they made looked way too new. Plus, getting a dead body to look natural in a photograph is nearly impossible. The eyes are wrong, the facial muscles sag.
So what did they do?
They actually found a living officer who bore a passing resemblance to the corpse, photographed him, and used that. Then they made the ID card indicate that it was a replacement for a lost original, which, again, reinforces the narrative that Major Martin is a bit careless. He loses things.
It's the juxtaposition that gets me. You have the entire fate of the Allied strategy in the Mediterranean, millions of lives, the direction of the whole war, and it is relying entirely on the sweat on a fake theater ticket and a borrowed photo of a clerk. It is literally method acting, but for a corpse.
The pocket litter is the costume. It's the armor that protects the lie. But beneath all that human clutter lay the actual weapon, the payload.
Right. The letters in the briefcase.
Yes. The briefcase, which was chained to his wrist using a standard military courier chain, contained forged personal letters between senior British officers. The most important document was a letter from the Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, Sir Archibald Nye, to General Harold Alexander, who was commanding the 18th Army Group in North Africa.
And these weren't official operational orders, because if a dead guy washes up with a giant document stamped top secret invasion plans for Greece, the Germans are going to roll their eyes. It's too obvious.
It would look entirely like a plant. So the tone of these forged letters had to be masterfully calibrated. They were casual, chatty, friend to friend. The Nye Alexander letter talked about mundane military administration, the awarding of medals, the shipment of new equipment.
Just really boring stuff.
Exactly. And then, nestled in between paragraphs about completely boring logistical matters, they dropped accidental hints. They implied, just casually between peers, that all the noise about attacking Sicily was just a cover story, a feint, and that the real, actual blow was going to land on Greece and Sardinia.
It's brilliant. You don't hand them the secret on a silver platter. You let them eavesdrop on a conversation where the secret just happens to be mentioned in passing. You make the German intelligence officers work for it. It makes them feel like they've uncovered this incredibly sensitive truth all on their own.
It exploits the ego of the intelligence analyst. When an analyst thinks they've outsmarted the enemy to find a hidden truth, they take ownership of that truth. They defend it fiercely when they present it to their superiors. The British were counting on the Germans' own vanity to sell the lie up the chain of command.
So the character is fully built. Major Martin exists on paper. He has a past, a fiancé, a debt, and a highly secret mission. Now they have to actually execute the drop. We are moving out of the writer's room in London and into April 1943. The tone of this whole operation completely shifts here from obsessive basement-level planning to a propulsive thriller.
Because the mechanics of the delivery were fraught with massive logistical risks. You have a decomposing body. You have to transport it from London to the southern coast of Spain without anyone asking questions, and without the body degrading so much that the time of death is obviously wrong to a medical examiner.
So they dressed the body in a Royal Marines uniform, filled his pockets with the litter, and attached the briefcase. Then they packed him into a specially designed sealed steel canister.
Like a giant metal cube.
Exactly. A tubular steel canister that looked a bit like a torpedo. And they packed the canister with dry ice.
The physics here are really important. As the dry ice sublimated, meaning it turned from solid carbon dioxide into gas, it displaced the oxygen in the canister, essentially halting the decomposition process and preserving the body during the long journey.
So they load this giant freezing steel tube into a van, drive it all the way up to Scotland, and load it onto a British submarine, the HMS Seraph, commanded by Lieutenant Bill Jewell. And the crew of the submarine has absolutely no idea what they're carrying.
The internal cover story was that they were transporting a highly classified, incredibly delicate meteorological device. The Seraph was a small submarine, and this massive steel canister was strapped to the deck down below.
The journey south is an absolute ordeal. They are traveling under the ocean, through waters heavily patrolled by German U-boats, carrying a dead man in a tube. and the dry ice inside the canister is slowly turning into carbon dioxide gas, which poses a lethal risk to the submarine crew if the canister leaks even a little bit.
The claustrophobia and the tension must have been unbearable for the officers who actually knew what was in there.
Finally, they reach their target, the coast of Spain, specifically a town called Huelva. On April 30th, 1943, under the cover of darkness, they surface. Lieutenant Jewell clears the deck of everyone except his officers. They open the canister. They read a brief psalm, essentially conducting a makeshift funeral right there on the deck, and push the body into the water, relying on the tidal currents to carry it to shore. So, why Spain? And why Huelva?
The geopolitical landscape here is key. Spain was officially neutral during the Second World War under the dictatorship of Francisco Franco, but it was a very Axis-leaning neutrality. British intelligence knew that the Spanish authorities were deeply sympathetic to Germany, and they routinely shared intelligence with them.
Because if they dropped him in enemy territory like occupied France, the Germans might just assume it was a trick. A dead body washing up on a heavily fortified German beach looks incredibly suspicious. But if they drop him in neutral territory, the Germans have to use their espionage networks to get the intel. It creates a barrier that makes the intelligence seem more valuable once they actually acquire it.
Precisely. The psychology of espionage dictates that stolen information is always trusted more than freely given information. And Huelva was chosen very deliberately. It wasn't just some random spot on the Spanish coast that had favorable tides. Huelva was thick with German Abwehr intelligence agents.
The Abwehr being the German military intelligence service.
Right. And the British knew there was an active, highly capable German spy named Adolf Claus operating right there in Huelva. Claus was the son of a German consul. He was deeply embedded in the local community, and the British knew he had incredibly close ties to the local Spanish officials. It was a targeted delivery right to his doorstep.
So they slide him into the water half a mile off the coast,
Right.
and then the agonizing, wait, you've launched your greatest deception, you've turned the submarine around, and Montagu and Cholmondeley just have to sit by the radio in London and hope the enemy takes the bait.
If the body sinks, the operation fails.
If the Spanish find it and just hand it back to the British embassy without telling the Germans that the operation fails.
But the elements actually cooperated. The body was found by a local Spanish fisherman named Jose Antonio Reymaria. As the British had hoped, the local Spanish military authorities took custody of the body and the briefcase. Officially, under international law, the Spanish were supposed to return the belongings to the British embassy unread, respecting diplomatic protocols for a deceased foreign military officer.
But unofficially, the diplomatic dance begins.
Unofficially, the Spanish authorities were stalling the British while quietly allowing German intelligence agents Adolf Claus's network to access the briefcase. The Germans were desperate to see what was inside, but they knew they couldn't just slash the briefcase open and steal the letters. The British would know they had been compromised, so the Germans had to extract the information without leaving a single trace.
And how do they do that? I mean, these letters are sealed in envelopes inside a locked briefcase.
The mechanical extraction is a fascinating piece of tradecraft. The Germans didn't tear the envelopes open. They essentially rolled the letters tightly into a cylinder while they were still inside the envelope, using a very thin probe inserted through the tiny unsealed gap at the top flap.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they meticulously pulled the rolled letters out, photographed every single document, and then painstakingly reinserted them back into the envelopes, trying to make it look like the seals had never been broken and the paper had never been touched.
Yeah.
Then the Spanish handed the briefcase back to the British with a polite diplomatic note, essentially saying, "Here are your officers' effects, completely undisturbed."
But the British aren't just going to take their word for it. They need to know for absolute certain that the Germans read the payload. This leads to an incredible forensic payoff. The briefcase gets flown back to London. British scientists analyze the envelopes to see if they've been compromised, and they don't just look at them and say, "Looks fine to me." They use microscopic forensics.
Right, because before the letters were ever placed in the briefcase, the British scientists had implemented subtle traps. They had placed a single eyelash inside the fold of the letters before sealing them.
A single eyelash.
A single eyelash. The theory was that if the letter was pulled out and unrolled, the eyelash would fall out. When they got the letters back, they used microscopes and UV light to examine the paper fibers and the seals. They found the letters had indeed been extracted, the eyelash was gone, and the paper fibers showed the stress of being tightly rolled. They could definitively determine the envelopes had been compromised, read, and resealed.
It's exactly like sending a really risky text message and agonizing over the screen, waiting for that little read notification to pop up. Only in this case, the read notification requires eyelash-level, microscopic forensic science, and the fate of millions of lives is hanging in the balance.
That's a really helpful analogy. But as you know with a text message, just because someone reads it doesn't mean they believe it or are going to act on it. Taking the bait is not the same as swallowing it. The climax of the con was figuring out what the German high command was actually going to do with that information. Did they think it was a plant, or did they buy it?
But how could they possibly know what Hitler was thinking in Berlin? They can't just call him up.
They knew through Ultere. Ultere was the designation for the intelligence gained from breaking the German Enigma codes at Bletchley Park.
Oh, right, the code breakers.
Yes, the British were secretly intercepting and decrypting the radio waves of the German military. They were essentially reading the enemy's mail in real time. So they didn't just sit around and hope the plan worked. They watched it work. They intercepted enemy signals showing that the German high command had accepted the intelligence as utterly genuine.
The intelligence gets passed from Huelva to Madrid to Berlin, and it lands on Hitler's desk. And he buys it. Which leads to Ewen Montagu sending that incredibly satisfying, famous message to Winston Churchill: mincemeat swallowed whole.
And the strategic impact was massive, measurable, and immediate. Based on the letters found on Major Martin, Axis forces fundamentally shifted their defensive posture. Hitler issued Directive 47, prioritizing the defense of the Balkans. They moved whole divisions, including elite panzer units and torpedo boats, away from Sicily to reinforce Greece and Sardinia.
So when the Allies eventually stormed the beaches of Sicily in July 1943 during Operation Husky, they faced a significantly reduced defensive force.
Yes.
It worked. The impossible bluff paid off. The sea lanes were opened, a massive strategic foothold was taken, and countless Allied soldiers lived because a corpse told a story. It's exhilarating. It feels flawless, like the perfect heist.
And that is exactly where we need to introduce a hard tonal shift. Because what we've just discussed is the caper. It's the thrilling, polished version of the story that makes everyone feel good. But our mission today is to dismantle that flawless myth and look at the ledger.
Let's do it. Let's pull the rug out from under the Hollywood version.
Mincemeat was not an airtight, elegant sweep of genius. It was a terrifyingly jury-rigged gamble. There were so many failure points where the entire operation could have collapsed in an instant.
Let's look at those failure points, starting with the autopsy in Huelva.
Exactly. The body they procured didn't perfectly fit the physiological profile of a man who had died in a plane crash and drowned at sea. If the Spanish coroner who examined the body in Huelva, a man named Eduardo del Torno, had been truly rigorous or even highly suspicious, he could have easily blown the whole thing wide open. A victim of drowning has lungs full of seawater. This body did not. Del Torno noted the smell of decomposition was strong, and he concluded the body had been in the water for several days, but he conducted a very superficial examination. He basically just looked at it and signed the paperwork. The plan relied heavily on a Spanish doctor not looking too closely.
So they just got lucky that the coroner basically rubber-stamped it because it was a smelly, decomposing body and he wanted to get it out of his morgue.
In many ways, yes, it was a massive vulnerability. Furthermore, the plan could have been undone by a single skeptical German analyst in Berlin. Someone who looked at this perfect treasure trove of intelligence washing up on the beach and said, wait, this is too perfect. Why is a major carrying the most secret letters of the war in a briefcase chained to his wrist on a vulnerable flight over enemy waters? This is a plant.
But if it was this vulnerable, if there were this many holes, why did the Germans swallow it whole? Why didn't they see through the theater tickets and the overdraft?
Because the British were pushing on a door that was already partially open. Hitler and the German high command were already deeply paranoid about an attack on the Balkans. Hitler had a strategic obsession with Greece because it protected the Romanian oil fields, which fueled the entire German war machine.
Ah, so they wanted to believe it.
They wanted to believe that Greece was the target because it aligned with their existing fears. Mincemeat succeeded because it provided confirmation bias to a command structure that was already anxious about that exact region. The Germans looked at the letters and saw exactly what they were already primed to see.
That makes so much sense. It wasn't a magic spell that instantly changed their minds. It was a perfectly timed push in the direction they were already leaning. But if it was this messy, this reliant on luck, and a lazy Spanish coroner, why do we all remember it as this flawless, airtight masterstroke?
The tidiness of the legend largely comes from Ewen Montagu himself. After the war, in 1953, he wrote a best-selling book called The Man Who Never Was. And while it's a foundational text and a gripping read, we have to remember, it is a participant's account. It was heavily shaped by wartime secrecy. He couldn't mention LTRA or the double-cross system at the time, and the natural human desire to present a polished, heroic narrative of a chaotic event.
Right, you want to be the hero of your own story.
Exactly. The book was later made into a popular movie in 1956. The legend solidified because the truth was still partially classified, and frankly, a flawless victory orchestrated by brilliant intelligence officers is a much better story to sell to the public.
But the biggest piece of truth that was hidden behind that polished story, the secret that was kept out of the book and the movie, wasn't a strategic detail. It was a person. For half a century, the grave in Huelva, Spain, read William Martin, a man who never existed. The thriller tone is completely gone now. We need to talk about the real man in that grave, the man whose pockets held the fake theater tickets.
For decades, his identity was a closely guarded state secret. It wasn't until the late 1990s, specifically 1998, after painstaking work by independent researchers, that the true identity of the corpse was officially acknowledged by the British government. His name was Glendora Michael.
So they finally unmask him in 1998, and it's a man named Glendora Michael. But looking at the sources on his life, it's a terrifyingly far cry from the dashing officer they pretended he was. Who was he?
The reality of Glendora Michael's life is a sobering corrective to the glamour of the deception. He was a destitute, unemployed Welshman. He suffered from severe mental and physical health issues. Both of his parents had died, leaving him entirely alone. He had drifted to London in a state of extreme poverty, and in early 1943 he died in an abandoned warehouse.
And the cause of death, it wasn't a hero's death on a battlefield.
No. The cause of death was ingesting rat poison that contained phosphorus. It was an agonizing, tragic, lonely end. Phosphorus poisoning slowly destroys the liver. Bentley Purchase, the coroner we mentioned earlier, identified that this specific cause of death left very few external marks, and the fluid buildup in the lungs could, to a very lazy observer, slightly mimic drowning. That is why Glendora Michael was chosen.
Just to pause here for a second, because whenever you dig into the history of Operation Mincemeat online, you sometimes see this fringe theory pop up, that the body wasn't Glendora Michael at all, but rather one of the sailors from the sinking of a ship called the HMS Dasher.
It's important to acknowledge that theory exists in the historical periphery. The HMS Dasher was a British aircraft carrier that suffered a catastrophic internal explosion and sank in the Firth of Clyde, resulting in a massive loss of life. Some authors have theorized that the body of a drowned sailor from the Dasher was secretly requisitioned because it would have genuinely drowned.
Which would solve the lung fluid problem with the coroner.
Right. However, we must rely on the evidence. The mainstream, accepted historical consensus, backed by the meticulous research of historian Roger Morgan and officially recognized by the government, is that the body was indeed Glendora Michael. The timeline, the coroner's records, and the eventual government admission all point definitively to him.
Okay, so we have Glendora Michael, a man who died in poverty, entirely alone, pushed to the margins of society. And this brings up a massive ethical reality that we just cannot ignore, the issue of consent.
It is the moral core of this entire story, and it is frequently glossed over in the celebration of the trick. Glendora Michael had no family to claim him when he died in London. He was never asked to participate in this war. He never volunteered for hazardous duty. He was a human being who was treated as literal raw material by his government. The intelligence officers needed a prop, and because he was poor, alone, and dead, he became that prop.
So what does this all mean? We love to celebrate the cleverness of the upper-class intelligence officers who dreamed this up, the Montagus and the Cholmondeleys. They were brilliant, yes, they saved lives. But isn't there something profoundly unsettling about the fact that they literally drafted a destitute, unconsenting man into the war only after he was dead? They took a man who had absolutely nothing in life, and in death, they took his body.
It is deeply unsettling. It forces us to confront the ruthless calculus of war. It strips away the gentleman spy romance of it all. Montagu and Cholmondeley were fighting for the survival of their nation, and in that desperation, the body of an impoverished Welshman became a tool of statecraft. They gave him a fake name, a fake rank, a fake romantic life, a fake debt, and dropped him in the ocean to be dissected by the enemy. The greatest fiction of the war was carried by an entirely real, tragically impoverished human being.
It's this incredible paradox. In a story that is built entirely out of elaborate lies, fake names, fake fiancés, fake debts, forged friendships, fake operational plans, artificial sweat on theater tickets, the only completely true, authentic thing was a poor man's physical body.
That is the ultimate ledger of Operation Mincemeat. A life that society had valued at absolutely nothing ended up being worth more, and arguably saving more lives, than almost anyone else's in the entire Mediterranean theater.
Glyndwr Michael changed the course of the war, and he did it without ever knowing, without ever agreeing to it. It wasn't until 1998, 55 years after he was dropped into the freezing waters off the coast of Spain, that his real name, Glyndwr Michael, was finally added to the bottom of the gravestone in Huelva. It took over 50 years to put Glyndwr Michael's real name on his own gravestone, and it makes you wonder, when we read the grand, sweeping histories of the world, how many other world-changing events are secretly resting on the shoulders of nameless, forgotten people? The ones who weren't the clever men in the room, but who gave absolutely everything, even when they had nothing left to give. The next time you hear a story about a flawless historical victory, ask yourself whose name is missing from the stone.